My name is Pascal Wallisch, a professor of psychology and data science at NYU. I'm an expert in visual perception. I'm here to answer your questions from Twitter. This is Optical Illusion Support. Ann O'Malley, oh, nice username, Anomaly, asks, have you seen the optical illusion where you stare at a spiral, then look away and things appear to be crawling? Yes, this is a very striking example. It's called the motion after effect. And you take a look at this video here. If you look at the dot in the center, it's 10 seconds or so, and then look away, I recommend looking at your hand. The hand will appear like it is crawling. And what's going on here, we actually understand this very well. There's been thousands of studies on this over the decades. We know the neurons in your brain that are underlying the perception of motion. Once they get active for a while, they get tired. They fire at a lower rate than they did before. And this is not anthropomorphizing. You can measure this with voltages in the brain, and we have. User Aspernian asks, I was staring at the spinning dancer illusion thing, and she started spinning backwards. This goes viral on social media every so often. And let me be very clear early on. Every time this does go viral, people say, oh, if you see it spinning clockwise or counterclockwise, this will tell you whether you're like a left brain or a right brain person. And I'm here to tell you, no, that has nothing to do with that. That is literally fake news. That is not true. Reasons you can tell that is not true is that if you look at this video, you might notice that midway looking at it, the dancer changes the direction of motion. So if it was clockwise before, now it goes counterclockwise and vice versa. Obviously nothing has changed in stimulus. If you watch this again, you will have a different experience, maybe. The image itself is devoid of critical information. So if the contour is just black. So it's unclear if this hand is in front or this hand is in front. So whether the dancer will spin this way or that way will depend on your assumption if you see the front hand or the back hand, yes? And the way you can switch this, if you deliberately force yourself to presume that one arm is the front and one is the back. This highlights two important things. One, your perception of the world is an interpretation of the world. And that interpretation depends on the assumptions that you make about the world if there's not enough information about the world. This is a great one. Spiros Lankos asks, what is motion-induced blindness? Motion-induced blindness is a great example of how important motion is. So what you see in the video is if you focus on the dot in the middle, and there's 3 yellow dots that are always there. If you keep focusing on the dot in the middle, those dots in the periphery start to disappear. Now, I'm claiming that they're always there, they never go away. You can confirm that, and you can rewind the video by keep looking at that. So what's going on here? Motion is very, very strong. So this is another example of how your perception is a best guess of the world. So there's 2 competing models now. One is that there's 3 dots, and they're always there. And one is a rotating plane that's kind of occluding those dots. And when in doubt, your brain will go with the motion. And I'm actually now gonna ruin magic for you, I guess, because most magic tricks rely on this. The idea is if I create some distraction by making a lot of motion here, I can do literally anything else in plain sight and you will not see it. Saz the Seabass asks, can someone please explain the difference between the phi phenomenon and beta motion to me? And I'm happy to help. Beta motion is happening right now. If you're seeing this on a device and this is a video of me talking, there is no motion. So you see I'm moving right now, but there's no motion. You see still images, something like 30 or 60 or whatever the frame rate of your monitor is, a second. Your brain is inferring the motion between that. So basically, if there's 2 objects, first one is object here and then object is here, the brain is filling in that something is moving. If something is here and then disappears, and then something is here, the brain concludes, infers, there's an unconscious inference, a conclusion, it's a guess. It didn't just was here and then it disappeared and then it was here. No, it moved. That's the inference. And if you make this fast enough, 20 hertz or 30 hertz, it will appear like smooth motion. That's the beta motion. What phi is you have the objects static, sometimes in a ring, and you have then some shadowy thing occluding it. It will appear like an object is moving around them. That's phi. That's what phi motion is. Kolian asks, how do mirages happen so weird? That is an example of a genuine optical illusion. Most things that are called optical illusions are not optical illusions. What do I mean by that? Optics means light. It's Greek for light. So a mirage is an example of an actual optical illusion. In contrast, most of the other things we'll see today are not optical illusions, they're visual illusions. The difference is those are not in the light, those are created by your brain. It usually happens if there is air that's being heated by a surface, like for instance a road, and that is then hitting a layer of air above it that's colder. And at that transition between the cold air, which is denser, and the hot air, which is less dense, light will bend. That's what creates the mirage. Next question by Andre Gomez Emilson. Does it feel like the dark parts are pushing brightness onto the center and the white is pushing out? First of all, this is called the Asahi Illusion by Kitaoka. What I find is most striking about this is that the center part here, right, does to me, and probably to you, although it depends on your screen, look brighter than the background white in the background, right? Can you see that? And it's not. It's the exact same whiteness in the center than in the periphery, right? So what is going on here is that the gradients of luminance that are pushing into the center, as the poster asks, make you assume that you're looking at something like the sun. The size of your pupil is a reflex. It dilates and constricts, depends on how much light is coming in. So if you look at a very bright light source, like I'm now looking at the studio lights, my pupils will constrict. Research shows that if you look at this illusion of an image that's not brighter, your pupils will also constrict, which is quite striking because it's a reflex. It's not under conscious control. John Teagarden asks, this is a pretty cool illusion. Does the black hole look like it's expanding to you? And this was discovered this year in 2022. And what was discovered was two things. Number one, 7 out of 8 people report that, yes, the black hole look like it's growing. It's expanding into the periphery. Second of all, it's also been shown that as if it was actually getting darker, your pupil is dilating, as if it was actually getting darker. So this is, again, stunning, because this is not under your conscious control. This is a reflex, and it's responding to your perception of the image, not to the actual light. Lisa Gatto 2 asks, is there an explanation for the dress I was late? Now, Lisa, you are in luck. I have the actual dress. The dress itself is unambiguously, in bright light, black and blue. Yes, we can all agree on that. It looks black and blue. But that's not what we were asking. What we were asking was, is the image of the dress black and blue or white and gold? If you ask that, most people will say 2/3, according to our research, will see this image as white and gold. So what's going on here? The lighting information in this image is ambiguous because it was taken inside, but it was overexposed on a cell phone picture with a Samsung camera. So in other words, it's unclear if this was artificial lighting or outside lighting, natural lighting, yes? If there's not enough information, our brains generally don't say, I don't know. They're very immodest. They will fill in the missing information by making assumptions about the world. What assumptions you make about the lighting depends on what experience of light you have. So what we could show in our research is that people who are morning people are more likely to see the dress as white and gold, whereas night owls are more likely to see the dress black and blue. And the reason for that is they are assuming that illumination that they have seen more of in their life and mentally subtract that from the image. Originally in 2015 when this came out, 2/3 of the people saw it as white and gold and 1/3 saw it as black and blue, even though in real life it's unambiguously 100% black and blue. Elizabeth Kropp asks, how did they make Tupac in hologram form? Well, there's 2 questions here. First question is, how do holograms work, and how did they do this specific one? Holograms work by having lasers, 2 lasers, interfere with each other. And lasers, by the way, don't just have one wavelength, they also have one phase, they're phase locked. So from that interference patterns, you can then reconstruct the entire image. So in other words, a genuine hologram will look 3D from any perspective you look at it, but it will be somewhat monochromatic. So what they did in the Tupac case is it's actually not a hologram, just want to be very clear. What they did is something else that's called, it's a version of Pepper's Ghost, where you have a transparent screen at 45 degrees where you project previous images or previous footage of Tupac onto it. That's an illusion. If you look out of that plane from a different perspective, from a different angle, it would not look 3D like a genuine hologram would. So the Tupac hologram was not a hologram. B.S. Jeffrey asks, has anyone experienced the wagon wheel effect when not watching TV or movies? So first of all, what is the wagon wheel illusion? Let's say you watch a car and their tires are spinning at a certain rate. That interacts with the sampling rate of the camera. If the frame rate of the wheels, of the spokes of the wheels of the car, rims I guess, is faster than that. If I call aliasing, it will actually look like it's moving backwards. So basically, that's from the interaction between the frame in the video and in reality. Some people get that in reality without the camera. And this is, to be honest with you, a very controversial subject, because the implication is that your mind has a certain frame rate. And certain people might have a different frame rate than other people, which is why some people might see it than others. It's related to how tired you are or how well rested you are. It might be also be an individual difference, but the implications are profound, because that means your mind is running at a certain frame rate. And yeah, I think that is true. Different people's brains probably run at different frequencies. Gerald Ebuka asks, in a world full of confusion, can we really trust our eyes? And that's a wonderful question, and I'll try to give you a nuanced answer. Your brain does not live in the outside world. The brain is encased fully in a bony shell. In other words, it's extremely, completely dark. What your perception is of the world is ultimately just a guess. Now, to be fair, that guess is usually a very good guess. All of us got here without accidents. You usually navigate the world fine. So in other words, usually your eyes are not lying to you. And the reason for that is that billion years of evolution made sure that if you're wrong about this guess, the punishment could be death. So this has been debugged in a very relentless process over a billion years. Only a stoner asks, how real is reality? Our eyes deceive us. Our brains trick us into seeing faces. Our thoughts create themselves. And you think I need drugs to make shirt trippy. Username checks out. That is a really good point. It is the very existence of illusions that illustrates the difference between what you perceive and what is out there, which makes it clear that what looks to us like reality is ultimately just a guess, even if the guess is pretty good. What illusions are is a way for psychologists to show people that there is a difference between what's out there and what your best guess is. I don't want to freak anyone out. What this means is, and most people don't know this, is that The Matrix actually is a documentary. It is your brain that creates this matrix for you. Again, this can feel very claustrophobic, because you're like, okay, what is really out there? You will see motion when there's no motion. You will see color when there's no color. You will be confused about the spatial layout of things and things like that. So the question is, what actually is out there? Chris Lynn Todd asks, I've written often about the moon illusion, which makes the moon larger when it's close to the horizon. Does anyone know if the Apollo astronauts experienced an Earth illusion? First of all, great question. So what the moon illusion is, as the poster asks, is if you look at the moon on the horizon, it will look considerably larger than if you look at it high up in the sky. It's the same moon, so how is that possible? When I was in grad school, a long time ago, I read a very thick book about 100 theories of why the moon illusion happens. So this is still unresolved. What I find most compelling is once the moon is on the horizon, you have a local context. In other words, if there is a hill or a mountain or a house even, it will make the moon look really, really big, because you know that the house or the mountain is really, really big, yes? Whereas if it's high up in the sky, then you have no reference point. So it will look like it actually is, which is actually very small. The moon is only 1 degree of visual angle or something like that. Would you get that on the moon? And the answer is, to my knowledge, nobody saw the Earth that low. But my prediction would be, yeah, if you go to a moon crater and look at the Earth from that vantage point, you would get an Earth illusion. Daniel Barker asks, Adelson's checker shadow illusion hurts my brain every time I look at it. Why must you lie to me, eyes? Okay, as you can see here, I think we can all agree that the shade of gray in A looks different than the shade of gray in B. Even if I tell you that they are the exact same shade of gray. But even if you know that, you cannot see them like that. You still will see B as lighter than A. What's going on is that your brain is taking into account the shadow that's coming off the cylinder here and is mentally subtracting that from the gray in B, which makes it look lighter. Why must the eyes lie? Well, the eyes must lie to you because the image that the eye gets is actually a very poor image. The optics are bad. The brain has to enhance the image for you to make sense of the world. So appearances can be deceiving. Rich Sweet asks, is this Animal Collective album cover moving or am I tripping out? And here it is. A good proportion of people will see motion here, but there is no motion. And that's what makes it so trippy. You know that there's no motion, and you can actually see that if you look at something closely, but you see things moving in the periphery. This disconnect between your perception of motion and you knowing there's no motion creates this trippy feeling. Tweety Yaka asks, does everyone else get the Herman Grid illusion when using their Mac keyboard, or is it just me? The Herman Grid is people see dark spots illusory dark spots where bright lines meet. And you can see that, we have a map here, I see that right now, there's bright lines, and in this intersection of those bright lines is a dark spot. That's not there, that's illusory. That's the Herman Grid. This is an example of what's called ladder inhibition. The idea is in the brain, neurons that are next to each other, that process a certain region of space, inhibit each other. And the more they're active, the more strongly they inhibit their neighbor. Now, if you're very strongly inhibited by your 4 strongly active neighbors, you're going to be strongly inhibited. It will appear darker because it can inhibit the periphery less. Jessica Pin asks, does anyone know what it means that I see the lines as the same in the Müller-Lyer illusion? Here is the Müller-Lyer illusion. All of these lines in the center are the same length, but most people will perceive this one in the middle as longer than this one, most people. But not everybody sees that. This actually happens to be what I'm interested in my lab, where we study individual differences in perception. What's going on here is that people take the context into account when interpreting the scene. I would bet that you probably have experience with, like, maybe you're like an artist or something like that. Maybe you can see through what the appearance is, and you can recover, like you can ignore the context. You know what the length of lines is. So artists, for instance, don't see the Müller-Lyer illusion. So people have a lot of experience with actual drawings. They will not be fooled by this. Breakdown Paradise asks, how do magic eye pictures work? So this is an example of where people are inferring, or minds are inferring, the third dimension from a two-dimensional image. This is called stereopsis. The two eyes see the image slightly differently, from slightly different perspectives. But your brain knows that. So basically it can compute, if you see the same image slightly differently, that there's actually a three-dimensional depth to that. This distance has to be reconstructed in your mind. Eliza Stuff asks, how do 3D movies work? The idea is that two images are presented. So if you have like colored lenses, so let's say one lens is orange and one lens is blue. So the red will get through the orange lens, but not the blue. That creates an offset, and this offset is the same idea, will then create the 3D effect. Anna Cooper asks, if you have a really long Ames room, is there any limit to the extent of the illusion? Could you have to crawl on your hands and knees at one end of the room, yet slip through a gap in the skirting board at the other? So here's the Ames room. So you look at that through a peephole, and it looks like a normal square room, but it's not. One of those ends will be much farther than the other one, but it looks like they're on the same distance away, right? By inference, then, if you think you know that they're the same distance away, the one that is actually farther away in reality will then look larger. So the user asks a good question. How far can you push that? And I'll put that right back at the user. Let's find out. Because in reality, we haven't tried that big ones. The biggest one was made in India in 2015. That's in the Guinness Book of World Records, but that was not that big. So why don't we make a really big one to see when that breaks down? Eventually, of course, the curvature of the Earth will swallow one of the people. Lupin Chevalier asks, what is forced perspective? Okay, great. So look at this. This is Ames' window, not Ames' room. This appears to be a square window, yes, but it's not. It's a trapezoid in reality. So this actually is larger than this part is larger than this part, but because you know how perspective works, you will assume that this is farther away, even though it's not. All of this comes from the fact that you do not have this third dimension available. You have to reconstruct it in your mind. So it's ambiguous. If this is farther away, if this is farther away, so you use your familiarity to resolve that. And you are familiar with perspective. Every painting you look at since the Renaissance uses this effect, where you basically have a perspective. It's a flat image, but just looks farther away if it's deeper in. Jim Rose Circus asks, my niece asked me why is his body so little and now I can't see it. Yeah, that is a very good point. Most people, of course, don't look at logos that closely, but I'm here to tell you that there is a bear in the Toblerone logo. There's an arrow in the FedEx logo. Once you saw that, you cannot unsee that. So until your dying day, you will see this little man here on the body of the KFC logo. And it's not just KFC. I'm gonna ruin ducks for you forever. Look at this duck. All ducks are wearing dog masks. Now that you saw that, you cannot unsee that. What this shows is that experience factors into your perception, just like in a dress, where like your prior experience with a stimulus helps you resolve what you see. Noah Gerard asks, I need to see the Penrose stairs in person. I can look at it a million times and still not fully understand the physics of it. Well, there's a reason for that. This was popularized by M.C. Escher, and in this 3D reality, this does not exist. The Penrose stairs are just one example of what Tara Aders asks, which is, What is a blivet? A blivet is an impossible object. And there are quite a few of those. And the whole point of it is you can, so for instance, if someone asks, hey, how many spikes are there? 3? There are 3 if you focus on this side, or 4 if you focus on this side. Who's right? Well, you're both wrong. The same question you can ask is, if I'm asking, is this slinky, by the way, it's always good to have a slinky on hand, is this a circle or is it a sine wave, yes? And the answer is the 3D reality slinky is both. Depends on your perspective. So your perspective also determines what you see. And so in this case, the 3D reality transcends both the circle or the spiral. Eat Right Arizona asks, have you ever heard of the age-old diet trick based on the Delboeuf illusion to use a smaller plate in order to trick the brain into thinking you are eating more than you actually are? There's a lot to unpack here. First of all, what is the Delboeuf illusion? The answer is a circle surrounded by a larger circle, as you can see here in the image, will appear larger than it actually is. The answer is yes, you can use that, and yes, this does work. And as research shows, weight control is all about, it's not all, but it's in large part about portion control. Again, when we go back to whether these illusions are good or bad for you, you can use these illusions for good. Absolutely. Susan Wardle asks, why do we mistakenly see faces when there are none? This is a condition that's called pareidolia. Yes, it is true that most people see faces everywhere. Many people see that. Perception is a guess, and the guess was debugged by evolution. So if you're wrong, you die. In other words, if there's actually someone out there who's trying to get you, and you think there's nobody out to get you, you might die. If there's no one, and you think there's someone, you might get a little scared, but that's fine. The payoff matrix is vastly in favor of false positives, meaning thousands of false positives, okay, meaning seeing faces when there are no faces. But if you miss one actual face, an enemy, you might die. So the system is built to accept thousands of false positives for one false negative. All right, that's it. That's all the illusions we have time for. I hope you learned something useful. See you next time.